Get out of that seat. You're not a real veteran. The cup shatters. Coffee spreads across the floor like spilled blood. Walter Morrison, 78 years old, sits frozen as Blake Morrison points an accusing finger at him. You never fought for anyone. You're nothing but a fraud. But what happens when the loudest accuser is hiding the biggest secret of all? The cafe falls silent. Every fork stops midair. Every newspaper goes still. Walter's weathered hands tremble around the broken handle, his army jacket worn thin at the elbows, a bronze star pin catching the fluorescent light, meaningless now in this moment of public shame. A police officer appears. Walter Morrison, stand up. You're being removed from the honor table now. That's when another voice cuts through the tension, clear and unwavering. You want him gone? You'll have to go through me first. Logan Pierce stands in his dress blues, eyes like storm clouds, staring down Blake Morrison with the intensity of someone who's faced real enemies. The cafe holds its breath. Someone mutters from the back. Let's see how long your hero act lasts, kid. But Logan doesn't flinch. He steps closer to Walter's table, and for a moment, their eyes meet across decades of unspoken understanding. Before we dive any deeper into what happened next, take just 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, the algorithm is brutal, and if you don't, there's a good chance you'll never see how this story ends. And believe me, you won't want to miss what Logan discovered about Walter that changed everything. Nobody moves. The entire cafe has become a tableau of suspended animation, as if someone has pressed pause on a movie just before the most crucial scene. Walter's hands continue their subtle trembling, a rhythm that speaks of old battles fought in places whose names most people can't pronounce. He clutches something against his chest, a battered army badge that looks like it's survived more than one war. His eyes remain fixed on the floor, studying the pattern of black and white tiles, as if they might reveal some hidden truth about how his life has led to this moment. The honor table, once a symbol of respect and remembrance, has become a stage for public humiliation. The morning regulars who used to nod politely in his direction now avoid his gaze entirely, their discomfort palpable in the stale cafe air. Evelyn Martinez, the cafe's owner, finally breaks her silence. Her voice carries the authority of someone who's been serving this community for 25 years, who's seen marriages begin over her apple pie and friendships end over political arguments. Let him be, she says, her accent carrying traces of the Mexico she left behind as a child. He's done nothing wrong. But the crowd seems deaf to her words. Whispers begin to ripple through the assembled patrons like wind through wheat. He stole from the Veterans Fund, someone says. Lied about his service record, adds another. Just an old fake trying to get free coffee, concludes a third voice, dripping with contempt. Logan remembers his father's words, spoken years ago during a fishing trip, that now feels like it happened in another lifetime. Son, the loudest accusers are usually hiding something. When someone points a finger, look at what their other hand is doing. As the accusations swirl around Walter like vultures, Logan notices something that everyone else has missed. A letter has fallen from the old man's coat pocket, its envelope yellowed with age and handling. Logan bends down and retrieves it, his eyes catching the faded ink that reads, "For my son, if I don't return." J.D. Pierce. The name hits Logan like a physical blow. J.D. Pierce, his father. The man who disappeared on a classified mission 3 years ago, whose body was never recovered, whose fate remains locked in military files marked with classifications Logan doesn't have clearance to read. Officer Jenkins approaches Walter with the resigned expression of a man following orders he doesn't believe in. His radio crackles again, and dispatch asks for an update. "Just removing a disturbance from the premises," Jenkins responds, though his voice lacks conviction. He reaches for Walter's identification, his badge, and the watch that hangs from a chain on his vest. A timepiece that looks like it's counted more hours than most people live. As these items are collected like evidence from a crime scene, Logan locks eyes with Walter. There's something in the old man's gaze that speaks of shared loss, of secrets that run deeper than the town's surface accusations. Walter's lips move almost imperceptibly, forming words that only Logan can see. "I knew him." The crowd begins to disperse, their appetite for public humiliation apparently satisfied. They return to their breakfasts and their newspapers, to conversations about weather and local gossip, as if they haven't just witnessed the systematic destruction of a man's dignity. No one notices Evelyn's silent tears as she begins to clean up the shattered ceramic, each piece of the broken cup a small monument to what's been lost. The town turns away, leaving Walter nameless, faceless, erased from the narrative of their comfortable morning routines. But Logan doesn't move. He stands there, holding his father's letter, feeling the weight of questions that demand answers. Walter looks up, his voice barely a whisper. "You have his eyes." "You knew my father?" Logan's voice cracks slightly. Walter nods slowly, his gaze dropping to the letter in Logan's hands. "Better than you might think, son. Better than this town will ever know." The words hang between them like a bridge across an impossible gulf. The morning rush subsides, and by 10 o'clock, Evelyn has made the unprecedented decision to close the cafe early. She flips the sign on the door and draws the blinds, creating a sanctuary of sorts in the small space that has witnessed so much of the town's daily drama. The fluorescent lights seem softer somehow, less harsh than they did during the morning's confrontation. She lets Logan and Walter into the back room, a cramped space filled with industrial coffee makers, boxes of napkins, and the accumulated detritus of a small business. The air smells of coffee grounds and industrial cleaner, but there's something comforting about its honesty after the performative cruelty of the morning. "This all started 3 months ago," Evelyn says, her voice low and careful, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Walter tried to report discrepancies in the Veterans Fund, money going missing, signatures that didn't match, donations that disappeared into thin air. That's when they made him the villain. Logan sets the letter on the small table between them, its presence seeming to charge the air with possibility. "Why didn't you fight back?" he asks Walter, though he suspects he already knows the answer. Walter's response comes in the form of action rather than words. With hands that shake not from fear but from the accumulated weight of years, he slides a stack of letters across the table. The papers are worn from handling, creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. Some bear official letterheads, others are handwritten on simple notebook paper. "Your father saved my life," Walter says, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't save his." Logan opens the first letter, and his father's familiar handwriting stares back at him. The date is from 4 years ago, before the mission that would claim J.D. Pierce's life. The words speak of a man named Walter Morrison, a veteran who had uncovered corruption in their hometown's veterans organization, but was too afraid to report it alone. The next letter is Walter's response, detailing meetings in parking lots and phone calls made from payphones. The careful choreography of two men trying to expose the truth without becoming targets themselves. There are photographs of forged documents, copies of bank statements that don't add up, witnessed testimonies from other veterans who were too frightened to speak publicly. Every report Walter filed was ignored. Every plea for investigation was buried under bureaucratic red tape. The evidence is overwhelming, damning, and completely ignored by the very people who were supposed to protect veterans' interests. Logan faces a choice that will define not just his own future, but the kind of man he wants to become. He can defend Walter and lose his place in the town's social hierarchy, or he can stay silent and let injustice triumph while wearing the uniform of a country built on the promise that such injustices would not stand. Word spreads quickly in small towns, especially when it involves conflict. By evening, Logan's phone buzzes with calls from old friends, each conversation following the same script. "Back off, Logan. You don't know what you're getting into. Walter's trouble. And if you keep defending him, you'll be next." Even Evelyn faces consequences. The next morning, her usual customers find reasons to get their coffee elsewhere. The parking lot that's been full every morning for 2 decades sits nearly empty. Anonymous phone calls warn her that supporting frauds and liars is bad for business. But Logan has made his decision. Standing in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by high school trophies and faded photographs of better times, he looks at his reflection in the mirror and sees his father's eyes staring back. "Let them talk," he says to the empty room. "I won't let another good man be erased." The weight of that decision settles on his shoulders like a familiar pack, heavy but necessary. Outside his window, the town continues its daily routines, unaware that everything is about to change. The town hall hasn't seen this many people since the controversial vote on the new traffic light 3 years ago. Tonight, however, the stakes feel infinitely higher. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across faces that Logan has known since childhood, transforming familiar neighbors into something resembling a tribunal. The air is thick with tension and the lingering scent of industrial floor cleaner. Blake Morrison stands at the front of the room, flanked by other members of the Veterans Council. His pressed uniform seems to gleam under the lights, every ribbon and medal positioned with military precision. But Logan notices something he's never seen before. A slight tremor in Blake's hands as he arranges his papers on the podium. "We're here tonight," Blake begins, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "because we can't tolerate frauds and imposters in our community. This is about respect for real service, for the men and women who actually bled for this country." Murmurs of agreement ripple through the crowd. Logan sits in the back, feeling the weight of stares from people who've known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Some faces show disappointment, others curiosity, but most display the kind of willful blindness that comes from not wanting to confront uncomfortable truths. Walter sits beside him, smaller somehow than he appeared in the cafe, as if the morning's events have physically diminished him. His army jacket hangs loose on his frame, and his eyes remain fixed on his hands, which rest folded in his lap like birds that have forgotten how to fly. Blake continues his presentation, producing documents that supposedly prove Walter's deception. Service records that don't match, testimonies from other veterans questioning Walter's claims, financial records showing suspicious activity in accounts bearing Walter's name. Each piece of evidence is presented with theatrical precision, designed to convince rather than illuminate. That's when Logan stands up. The room falls silent, the kind of quiet that precedes either revelation or catastrophe. Logan's dress blues catch the harsh light as he walks down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the sudden stillness. Every eye follows his progress, and he can feel the collective held breath of the community. "You want the truth?" Logan's voice cuts through the silence like a blade through silk, Here it is. He reaches into his jacket and produces his father's letter, holding it up for everyone to see. The paper trembles slightly in the artificial breeze from the building's ancient ventilation system, but Logan's voice remains steady. My father, J.D. Pierce, wrote this letter 4 years ago. He was investigating corruption in the Veterans Fund, working with a man named Walter Morrison, a man who risked everything to expose the real thieves. Blake's face drains of color, but he tries to maintain his composure. That's just a letter, son. Anyone can write a letter. Logan interrupts, his voice gaining strength. But not everyone can forge bank records, falsify signatures, and steal from the very people they claim to serve. Blake's eyes dart frantically around the room. Wait! Before you listen to these lies, I have a witness. Someone who can tell you the truth about Walter Morrison. A man in the back row stands up, Tom Bradley, another veteran. I saw Walter taking money from the fund office last year, late at night. I reported it to Blake immediately. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Logan feels the momentum shifting, but then he notices something. The slight nod Blake gives Tom, the rehearsed timing of it all. That's interesting, Mr. Bradley, Logan says, his voice steady. Because according to these bank records, you received 3 payments of $2,000 each from Blake's personal account. Same dates you claim you saw Walter. Tom's face goes white. The room erupts in shocked voices. That's impossible. Blake wouldn't... What's going on here? Logan produces the documents Walter had shown him, spreading them across the table at the front of the room like cards in a high-stakes poker game. Bank statements showing regular transfers to accounts controlled by Blake Morrison, forged signatures on authorization forms, photographs of documents that were supposed to be destroyed but were secretly copied by Walter before he reported the discrepancies. The evidence is overwhelming, damning, and impossible to dismiss. Evelyn appears at Logan's side, having slipped in through the back door. Her presence seems to give him additional strength, and she produces her own folder of documents. I've been keeping records too, she says, her voice carrying across the suddenly electric atmosphere. Every time Blake came to the cafe, talking about how much money the Veterans Fund was raising, how well it was being managed, the numbers never added up. An old veteran named Sergeant Martinez, Evelyn's uncle, a man who served in Korea and has been respected in the community for 50 years, stands up slowly. His voice, when it comes, carries the weight of absolute authority. I saw the original reports, he says, each word carefully measured. Walter Morrison came to me 3 years ago with evidence of theft. I told him to take it to Blake Morrison, not knowing. He pauses, the implications hanging in the air like smoke. Not knowing Blake was the one doing the stealing. The room erupts. Voices rise in anger, confusion, and disbelief. Some people shout questions, others demand explanations. Blake tries to speak, but his words are lost in the chaos. His carefully constructed narrative is crumbling in real time, and everyone can see it happening. Tara Williams, a local reporter who's been live streaming the meeting on her phone, captures every moment as it unfolds. Her audience, initially just a few dozen locals, grows to hundreds as the stream is shared across social media platforms. The story is going viral in real time, spreading beyond the confines of their small town into the larger world. Blake panics. His composure finally cracks completely, and he begins shouting over the crowd, trying to discredit the evidence, attacking Logan's character, questioning Walter's mental state. But his desperation only makes the truth more obvious. Police officers who had been standing quietly at the back of the room move forward. Officer Jenkins approaches Blake with handcuffs, his expression grim but determined. "Blake Morrison, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and theft from a veterans organization." The hall goes dead quiet again, but this time the silence is different. This time, it's the silence of a community confronting the uncomfortable truth about itself. Walter stands slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. For the first time in months, he meets the eyes of his neighbors and fellow citizens. But there's no triumph in his expression, no vindication or relief. His eyes are tired, his face unreadable, bearing the weight of a man who has fought a battle he never wanted to fight. The crowd parts as Logan walks out with Walter, but no one says a word. Some faces show shame, others confusion, but most simply look away, unable to process what they've witnessed. Outside, the night air feels clean after the stifling atmosphere of the town hall. Logan and Walter walk in silence toward the parking lot, their footsteps echoing off the empty pavement. The newspaper runs the story on page 1, but by the following week, it's buried beneath reports of high school football scores and upcoming church fundraisers. The town has a remarkable capacity for forgetting what it doesn't want to remember, and the Blake Morrison scandal becomes just another uncomfortable chapter that people prefer to skip over in conversations. Walter's name is officially cleared. The charges against him are dropped, the stolen funds are recovered, and his military service record is restored to its rightful place in the county archives. But vindication, Logan discovers, doesn't always feel like victory. The cafe reopens the honor table with a small ceremony that draws exactly 12 people, including Logan, Walter, and Evelyn. A few veterans show up, men with gray hair and careful expressions, who shake Walter's hand and mutter apologies that sound more like obligations than genuine remorse. The local VFW chapter sends a representative who makes a brief speech about healing and moving forward, but the words feel hollow in the nearly empty cafe. Evelyn hangs Walter's battered watch and his father's letter in a small frame above the honor table, creating a modest memorial to truth that most people will walk past without noticing. The gesture is beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure, a reminder that some victories are too quiet to be celebrated. Walter returns to his morning routine, occupying the same chair at 7:30 sharp, ordering black coffee and wheat toast, leaving exact change plus a $1 tip. But something fundamental has changed. The easy anonymity he once enjoyed is gone, replaced by a different kind of isolation. People nod politely when they see him, but their smiles are careful, calculated things that don't quite reach their eyes. A few individuals make genuine efforts to apologize. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop brings him a small bouquet with a note that reads, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up." Tommy Rodriguez, who works at the hardware store, stops by his table one morning to shake his hand and say, "My grandfather would have been proud of what you did." But for every person who acknowledges their mistake, there are 10 others who simply pretend nothing ever happened. They order their coffee and read their newspapers and discuss the weather, creating a bubble of normalcy that carefully excludes any mention of recent events. Logan is offered interviews by regional news stations, opportunities to tell his story on a larger stage. A veterans advocacy group wants to feature him in their newsletter. A local politician suggests he consider running for town council, capitalizing on his newfound reputation as someone who stands up for what's right. He refuses them all. Instead, he and Walter meet each morning at the same old table, sharing comfortable silences and occasional conversations about everything except what brought them together. They talk about baseball, about the weather, about Walter's garden and Logan's plans for college. Sometimes Walter tells stories about places he's been, battles he's fought, friends he's lost. Logan listens, understanding that these stories are gifts, precious things that Walter has kept locked away for decades. But Walter never smiles during these conversations. His expressions remain carefully neutral, as if he's afraid that showing too much emotion might shatter the fragile peace they've constructed. "Don't thank me," he tells Logan one morning, his voice barely audible above the cafe's background noise. "Don't remember me as some kind of hero. Just let me rest." The words contain a weariness that goes deeper than physical exhaustion, a bone-deep tiredness that comes from fighting battles that shouldn't need to be fought, from defending truths that should be self-evident. Blake Morrison is sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the Veterans Fund. The trial receives minimal coverage in the local newspaper, relegated to a small column on page 7 between advertisements for lawn care services and church suppers. By the time he's released, most people have forgotten why he went to prison in the first place. The town establishes an annual Truth and Reconciliation Day to commemorate the events and honor veterans who have been overlooked or forgotten. The first year draws a modest crowd of about 50 people. The second year, attendance drops to 30. By the third year, the event is quietly discontinued due to lack of interest. Walter walks the streets of his hometown with a kind of invisible dignity, no longer mocked, but not quite welcomed either. Children who used to run past him now offer polite nods that their parents have taught them. Store clerks are courteous, but distant. He exists in a space between redemption and acceptance, cleared of wrongdoing, but not quite forgiven for the discomfort his vindication has caused. Evelyn keeps the honor table exactly as Walter prefers it. Simple, unadorned, marked only by the small brass plaque and the framed letter. Sometimes other veterans sit there, but more often it remains empty except for Walter's morning visits. The table becomes a quiet monument to the complexity of truth, to the uncomfortable reality that doing the right thing doesn't always lead to happy endings. Logan prepares to leave town for college, carrying with him lessons that no classroom could have taught. The night before his departure, he sits with Walter at their usual table watching the sun set through the cafe's front window. "I used to think that exposing the truth would fix everything," Logan says, his voice thoughtful. "That once people knew what really happened, they'd change." Walter nods slowly, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Truth is like medicine," he replies. "Sometimes it cures the disease, but it always leaves a bitter taste." The morning Logan leaves for college, Walter sits alone at the honor table, watching through the window as a young man in civilian clothes loads boxes into an old pickup truck. There's no fanfare, no crowd of well-wishers, just a mother's tears and a father's firm handshake. The quiet rituals of small-town departures that have played out countless times before. Evelyn refills Walter's coffee without being asked, a gesture that has become as routine as breathing. She doesn't say anything about Logan's departure, but her eyes linger on the empty chair across from Walter, understanding that some absences echo louder than presence ever did. The cafe fills with its usual morning crowd, people who have learned to navigate around the truth like water flowing around a stone. They've developed an elaborate choreography of avoidance, ordering their breakfast and discussing their plans without acknowledging the man who sits quietly by the window, the living reminder of their collective failure of courage. Walter opens a letter that arrived the previous day, postmarked from a military base he recognizes but hasn't thought about in years. Inside, a young soldier, someone who heard Logan's story through the military grapevine, writes about his own struggles with corruption in his unit, asking for advice about whether to speak up or stay silent. The letter joins dozens of others that have arrived over the past months, each one carrying the weight of moral dilemmas that have no easy answers. Walter has become an accidental counselor to people he's never met, a repository of hard-won wisdom about the cost of doing what's right. He writes back to each letter. His response is careful and honest. He doesn't encourage heroism or discourage caution. Instead, he simply shares what he's learned. That truth is a luxury some people can't afford. That courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is survive long enough to fight another day. Logan calls from college every few weeks. Their conversations covering everything from academic challenges to homesickness to the strange experience of living in a place where nobody knows your story. He's studying journalism now, inspired by the power of truth-telling but sobered by its limitations. "I'm writing about you," Logan tells Walter during one of these calls. "About what happened here. My professor thinks it could be important." Walter is quiet for a long moment, the weight of being transformed into a story settling on his shoulders like an old coat. "Just remember," he says finally, "that some heroes don't want to be remembered as heroes. Sometimes all we want is to disappear quietly, knowing we did what we could." The article Logan writes wins a regional journalism award and is picked up by several national publications. For a brief moment, their small town finds itself in the spotlight again, with reporters calling for interviews and television crews setting up cameras in front of the cafe. Walter refuses all requests, maintaining the same dignified silence he's practiced for months. But the attention brings unexpected consequences. Veterans from across the country begin visiting the cafe, making pilgrimages to sit at the honor table and share their own stories of moral courage and institutional failure. Evelyn starts keeping a guest book, and the entries tell a collective story of service members who chose conscience over comfort, who paid prices that their communities never fully understood. The cafe becomes an unofficial shrine to uncomfortable truths, a place where people can acknowledge the complexity of heroism without demanding simple answers. The seasons change, and Walter's routine remains constant. 7:30 every morning, black coffee and wheat toast, exact change plus $1 tip. But his world has expanded beyond the confines of the cafe. School children doing reports on local history occasionally interview him, their questions innocent and direct in ways that adult conversations never are. "Were you scared when people said mean things about you?" a third grader asks during one such interview. Walter considers the question with the seriousness it deserves. "Yes," he says finally. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what you think is right. It just means you do it anyway." The child nods solemnly, as if this makes perfect sense, and Walter realizes that perhaps the next generation will understand what their parents couldn't. That evening, Walter sits at his small kitchen table, a blank piece of paper before him. His hand shakes slightly as he writes, but his words are clear. Some battles are won not by the noise they make, but by the silence they leave behind. "I fought my war not with bullets, but with truth. Logan helped me find something I thought I'd lost forever. Not vindication, but peace. Thank you for helping an old soldier come home." He seals the letter, addresses it to Logan, and sets it aside with instructions for his landlord. Outside his window, the town sleeps peacefully, unaware that one of its quiet heroes is saying goodbye. One morning, Walter doesn't come to the cafe. Evelyn waits until 8 o'clock, then 9, before calling his landlord. They find him in his small apartment, sitting in his favorite chair with a cup of coffee gone cold on the table beside him. He died peacefully, they say, as if sleep had simply claimed him between one breath and the next. The funeral draws hundreds of people, including Logan, who flies home from college to serve as a pallbearer. Veterans from 3 states attend, forming an honor guard that stretches from the church to the cemetery. The local newspaper runs a full obituary on the front page, finally giving Walter the recognition he never sought in life. At the service, Sergeant Martinez steps forward. "Walter Morrison saved my unit in '68 when our radio operator was killed. He stayed behind enemy lines for 6 hours, calling in coordinates that brought us home." His voice breaks. 43 years I've known this man's courage. Shame on us for forgetting it." Another veteran, a woman in her 50s, speaks. "Walter found my father's remains in Vietnam through his own research, his own money. Gave our family closure when the army couldn't. Never asked for thanks. Never asked for anything." One by one, they tell stories the town never heard. Of Walter's quiet heroism, his decades of helping other veterans navigate bureaucracy, find lost benefits, locate missing comrades. Each testimony is a small light in the darkness of their collective guilt. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute comes from the children who interviewed him for their school projects. They create a memorial garden behind the cafe, planting flowers that bloom in rotation throughout the year, ensuring that something beautiful grows from the soil of his story. Logan returns to college carrying Walter's final letter, written weeks before his death, and left with instructions that it be delivered only after his passing. The words are simple but profound. Some battles are won not by the noise they make, but by the silence they leave behind. Thank you for helping me find my peace. The honor table remains, marked now by a small plaque that reads, "In memory of Walter Morrison and all who served truth over comfort." People still sit there, still order coffee and read newspapers, but the conversations are different now. Quieter, more thoughtful, touched by the understanding that heroism comes in many forms. Years pass. Logan becomes a journalist, specializing in stories about institutional corruption and moral courage. He never writes another story about Walter, understanding that some truths are too precious to be commodified, too personal to be shared with strangers. The cafe continues to serve its community, and Evelyn continues to honor the memory of a man who taught them all that sometimes the greatest victory is simply being allowed to rest. The honor table welcomes new faces, new stories, new struggles with conscience and courage. And in the quiet moments between conversations, when the morning light slants through the windows just right, visitors sometimes catch a glimpse of something that might be Walter's ghost, or might just be the shadow of their own better angels, reminding them that truth, however uncomfortable, is always worth defending. Not every battle ends with applause. Sometimes, all a soldier wants is to be left alone with dignity intact and conscience clear. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give our heroes is not celebration, but simply the peace to rest. Remember that before you judge the quiet ones sitting in the corners of cafes, carrying stories too heavy for casual conversation. Before you assume you know someone's story just because they don't shout it from rooftops. If stories like this move you, if they remind you that heroism comes in many forms and that truth is worth defending even when it's inconvenient, take a moment to share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so that no story and no person fades away unheard. Because sometimes, the most important battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but in the everyday spaces where ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. Walter Morrison chose truth over comfort. Logan Pierce chose courage over conformity. What will you choose?